Hello, my friends. Today I'm going to be talking about my favorite books so that you can get an idea of what my reading tastes are. And from there, you can probably decide if we have similar reading tastes, I guess. So first, I'm going to go through fiction books, and then I'll go through the nonfiction books. For length of the video, I decided to go with 5 in each section, which was harder than I thought to do. And then I'll probably mention some honorable mentions. The first book in the fiction section is Easter Island. So the book follows 2 main characters. Both of them are women and both of them are scientists. So there's a lot of relatability for me right there already. And they both make their way to Easter Island. And the first character makes it there in 1913, I think. And then the second character follows 60 years later, but they're not related at all. It just tries to show you the struggles that women have as scientists and researchers. And it has a lot of relatability for grad students or women in science. And because of that, I found it very moving. And there was times where I was livid, angry because of the things that were happening. I know that not everyone watching this is a grad student, but if you are, you should definitely pick this book up. It's so good. Okay, so the next book I actually have a copy of here, and that's The Last Whales. It's written by Lloyd, Abbey. Now, I actually found this at a local used bookstore. So the whole story is told through these 2 blue whales. I really love this book just because I am a marine biologist. It follows whales. There are parts of it that can be quite technical, and there were some points where I was reading this out loud to my partner, and he thought it was so technical it was boring for him. Whereas for me, because I like the technical parts of, let's say, whale anatomy or where it is in the ocean and how fast it might be swimming, I really enjoyed those parts. So yeah, it has quite a few nitty-gritty parts dealing specifically with marine biology and anatomy, and actually it dives quite a bit into human impacts on marine life. And so there are parts where the whale is injured because of humans. One of the blue whales remembers a time where it was the industrial whaling period, and it remembers how its mother was hunted by whalers, and it wanders the ocean alone for a while. And there are so many parts where I actually felt like tearing up. I don't tear up a lot in books. And sometimes I was so upset I could only read a few pages before I had to put it down. So it actually took me a long time to read this book. But if you like books on nature, or if you like whales, I really highly recommend this book. But be careful, you might get really sad. Yeah. So the next book that I really like is The Hobbit, and that's by Tolkien. I really like this book because it's so cozy, it's so fun, it's so adventurous, it's such a fun read. I actually didn't read it until my second year at university. I don't know why I never came across it before, but since then, man, I just love that book. It's from the very first few sentences where it's describing the Hobbit hole, it just makes me want to live in a Hobbit hole and just spend my time reading there, being cozy, having some tea. It's such a good time. And my love for the Hobbit kind of encapsulates my love for fantasy. So I really do like fantasy books. And the next one is also actually a fantasy book, and that's Name of the Wind. I read this only a few years ago now, maybe 3 years ago, and I actually borrowed it from my cousin after hearing recommendations for a year prior to me actually reading it. And it's so beautifully written, and it flows in such a way that it's so easy and fun to read, kind of maybe almost like The Hobbit, where you're just having so much fun reading it. And there's a lot happening, and based on the fact that 2 of the 5 of the books that I love in the fiction section are fantasy books, you can see that I really do like fantasy books. I don't have any sci-fi books in this section only because I only started reading it, but I definitely will be reading more sci-fi books for sure. I actually have a couple honorable mentions too, just because I couldn't leave them out. And the first one is The Count of Monte Cristo, and that is written by Alexandre Dumas. And I read this just only maybe 2 months ago. It's a really thick book. Like, that is a thick book. It's 1,200 pages. I read the unabridged English version. Felt like I lost a friend when I finished that book. And I was actually kind of sad after, and I couldn't read anything for 2 days after because it was like a friend had died, because it was such a long book. You really go through with the protagonist throughout this whole life. And I really like books that make you attached to the character and you're with them for so long. And I really actually like the prose too. It was very flowery at times, and I would definitely recommend The Count of Monte Cristo if you want to read a classic. But it is really long, so I can understand why it might deter you. It is a big, scary book. Okay, so we're going to go into the nonfiction section now, and the first book I'm going to recommend is Lab Girl. That's by Jahren. And I read this in the second year of my master's degree when I was finishing up. And it is a memoir. She writes about her science journey throughout her, I think it's PhD, I don't remember. But she's a botanist. No, she's a paleobotanist. So she studies what the vegetation might have been like in the past couple million years. And this one is another book specifically for grad students or women in science. And those are the books that I'm really loving right now just because I can relate to them the most. And I really feel like books that really speak to you, they speak to you because of where you are. And I really feel like the past few years, the right books have found me at the right time. So what leaves the most impact for me? Yeah, so Lab Girl, man, I just love that book. I highly recommend it to any, again, woman in science. So the next one is Halfbreed by Maria Campbell, and she is a Métis woman that grew up in the prairies in Canada, and it follows her story all the way from her childhood, where she remembers the uprisings that were starting to happen and how she didn't really understand what was happening, but she knew something big was happening. And she even glimpsed Louis Riel, who is a huge Indigenous icon, idol in Canada, in North America even. This book really encapsulates what life was like as a Métis person in Canada in these times. And if you don't know, Métis people have an interesting history where their ancestors are from the prairies, but they also have some French blood. So hence the word Métis, which is French, M-E-T-I-S over here. And they weren't considered status Indians for the longest time. So this is a really sensitive topic, and I urge you to read more about it if you don't know anything about Métis people in Canada. I don't know what it's like in the States, actually. But if you read this book, it kind of shows you the struggle of not being considered Canadian or being considered Indigenous, which are two very separate things. And when you're caught in the middle, like Marie Campbell and her family were, it leads to a lot of hardships. And this, like I said, is very relatable to me because I'm Indigenous, and in Canada there are 3 categories of Indigenous. That is Inuit, First Nations, and Métis. So there are 3 distinct groups. This book is from a Métis perspective. Highly recommend. So the next book, it actually kind of is similar to the one I just mentioned, and that's An Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King, who is a classic Indigenous writer in Canada, and he has a lot of books, and I haven't read them all yet, but he is a good writer. And this book, oh my gosh, it I was reading it and I could only read a few pages at a time because my blood was boiling. Like, there is so much in here that I really wish all Canadians would read this book, because it walks you through all the injustices that happened to Indigenous people in Canada. Now, it's not that big. It's you can definitely consume it maybe over a week, because it is pretty dense sometimes. Although you are really sad or mad when you're reading through the book, but when you get to the end, it ends on a really good note. And I don't want to spoil it, but I will say that it makes me so proud to be Inuit, because it does mention how Inuit are leading the way for sovereignty. And I love that. So if you want to learn about Indigenous treaties, if you want to learn about Indigenous rights, this is the book to read. And I actually would be surprised if you haven't heard of it yet. Yeah. So highly, highly recommend this one. So those two kind of showed you that I really like to read about Indigenous rights and memoirs. Now, the next book I'm going to mention is another memoir. Actually, there are quite a few of these are memoirs. Next one is First They Killed My Father by Loung. Pretty much, it's about the massacre in Cambodia. And I traveled through Southeast Asia in 2015. And I really love reading books about places that I'm going to go visit, or the places that I'm at, or that I just came from. And this was one of the books that was recommended to me by a fellow backpacker. Oh, it was Mike. Hey, Mike. Thanks for the book recommendation, Mike. Now, I chose to put this in here over the other 5-star books that I have in my Goodreads, because I really like to read memoirs where I learn something about a country. Like most recently, I read The Girl with 7 Names. So I love to learn about different places. I'm still an avid traveler, so I like to read a lot of books based in different areas. Now, I do want to include an honorable mention in the nonfiction section, and that's Educated by Tara Westover. And I really like this book for lots of reasons. There is a lot of content that deals with abuse. So it is a really hard read, but it is, I think, really important to understand how abuse affects people. And I've even seen some reviews where people don't believe that it's true because of the abuse that she went through and why she would stick around. And that's, to me, I think those people are privileged to not understand why. Oh God, I'm trying not to tear up right now. So this follows a girl who was born and raised in the mountains of Idaho, and she grew up to a survivalist family who doesn't believe in Western medicine in school. They're just always preparing for the big day where they need to use their stores of food and ammunition, and when the government eventually comes for them for some reason. And in here you can really see how the familial relationships, she starts off really close with one of her brothers, and you can actually watch that relationship become abusive and violent. And it happens really gradually, where she starts to think that, oh, he's just having a bad day. Oh, he's just having a bad day. It's fine. He's going to go back to normal. He's going to come back and apologize. And this happens less and less. And that right there shows you, I think, it really nicely showed how abuse can happen. And how it's not always easy to have a place to go. So that's one of the honorable mentions. So now that you've seen what I like, maybe you can suggest some books based off of what I talked about today. Or you should tell me what your favorite books are and why. I really feel like you can learn a lot about a person based on the books that they love. And based off what I think I showed you today, okay, these are my favorite books right now, and a lot of them are because of my lifestyle right now. So grad student, researcher, Indigenous rights. That's pretty much what my book love right now is made of. But I want to stress that I do love to read fantasy books, and I do like to read sci-fi. I'm not much of a romance person, as you could see. There wasn't any in here. I do like to read one or two horror thriller type of books a year, but I'm actually hoping that some of you will recommend your favorite horror or thriller or mystery books. Actually, I do like some mystery books. I like Agatha Christie. I love Agatha Christie books. I think it's mostly because of nostalgia, though. Yes, just throw her in the nonfiction section. So that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. Hit the like button if you think I'm doing a good job trying to explain these books, because I don't know if I am. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.